Very good.
Okay, so we're live now, Adam. If you want, actually, while I'm just setting this up and sharing it to my pages, if you want, actually, just give yourself a little short introduction and basically go on with what you were going to say. What you were stand for. I guess you identify as a liberal or a libertarian, and then just kind of go off from there and just.
Yeah, I'm probably a funny mix of things. It'd probably be very hard to put into just one box. I spent the early part of my life as a musician and artist, and musical artist, I guess you'd say, and so, and I have a lot of. If you look at the big five personality traits, I have a lot of traits that would put me in the liberal category.
Right.
But at the same time, I've always been a very small c conservative in some ways. I've always been very suspicious of radicals, very suspicious of extremists, and suspicious of revolution and sympathetic to evolution. And and I also have a family history, but at the same time, to flip back to the other side, my grandfather was a labor organizer and an actual communist, and I understand because it's my grandfather and it's in my family. I understand why he did what he did, and I think he was motivated by all the right reasons. I think, if I look at what my grandfather did, I cannot honestly say I would do differently. Let me say it even more than that. I would hope that I would have the courage to do what my grandfather did if I was in the same situation as my grandfather.
Right.
So, so things aren't, I guess you could summarize my overall position as saying that things are rarely simple enough to fall cleanly into one category or another.
Right. Well, that's actually perfect, because that's the same with myself as a libertarian. Is I get attacked because I won't fall into that left-right camp, right? I won't align with it, because to me it's like just two opposing teams, but they have the same kind of concept where they want to socially or economically enslave people in some way. And to me, it's just a matter of particularities and how they want to go about doing it. Some are more emphasis on the economic, right? More emphasis on the social, and determine whether you use that conservative or the liberal brand, which to me, that's why the reason why I don't do it is because if you're going to be talking about liberty and principles, there can't be a left or right. It's like, could you imagine doing the same thing if you're talking about math or anything that's built on of any objective science? It's like, there's no such thing as a left or right mathematician, right? It's, you either accept that 2 + 2 is 4 or you don't. To me, that sounds weird, which is why I think historically has caused a lot of people, especially because we rely on horizontal, like the people that we live around and surround ourselves with, or more of an authority of people that tell us these things. And like I say, to me, the biggest thing I started when I ventured down this path of trying to get to the bottom of what is government, what is this whole thing, is why is it that it's constantly always put forth? Now, I understand if you want to break it down to the psychological realm, the left and the right hemisphere of the brain, and how there is, the heart and the mind, right? The difference between your emotions, like in compassion and empathy, and then the mind, which is, more like is in terms of the side of the brain, which is more analytical in nature. But to me, that's just more of a divide and conquer, because my brain has both hemispheres. So I'm not eliminating one, right? I've got to figure out to set up something. I think all human beings, we all require something to give us some semblance of consistency in terms of morals and ethics and what law represents. So to me, and when you were talking, just to go back a little bit, you were saying, like the whole thing with radicals, or, like I say, or people on the extreme. Now, to me, I originally, when I first started ventured down this road, like I say, I would have been on the same kind of wavelength in terms of the concept of extreme. But now it's completely flipped upside down to me. It's those who are actually promoters of government or the state. To me, that's a much more extreme position, because if we know what government is, which is basically a monopoly of force or violence, as you acknowledged in your own post on ThankSpot, right? Now, to me, that is to give any person or group a monopoly of force or violence. That, to me, seems way more extreme than someone says that I don't believe. I mean, like I say, today we're talking about democracies, let's say, but take this all the way back, whether you're talking about the monarchs of Europe, or the pharaohs of Egypt, or it's some authority, whether it's like come down by God appointed them or because of vote or, you know, majority rule. Or to me, it's, you're still placing this emphasis on giving certain people or a certain group these rights that cannot exist anywhere in the state of nature, have never in the past, and never in the future. At least people, what I go back to the old days, at least when, you know, the King of England was coming around to collect his taxes, at least most of the people at that particular time, I would assume anyways, didn't believe. They knew they were under the subject of the rule by sheer fact that they lived in that particular geographical landmass, but they didn't feel that they were beholding, right? They had to be by sheer the fact that just like if a thief come up to me tomorrow, one said, your wallet or you die, right? It's like, okay, I'll give you a wallet, but I don't believe for 1 second that thief has any authority. To me, the most radical thing is the fact that we grow up as adults believing, and this, like I say, this happens by sheer fact of the way we're educated and the horizontal enforcement by our peers or by our parents or grandparents have been taught the same kind of thing, is to believe that these people have this pretense of authority that I will actually submit. Like if I'm a statist and I conform to the ideology or the religion of statism, I will yield my own individuality, my own rights, freedoms, and liberties, because I believe that. To me, that's the biggest problem. That is an extreme thing where people believe that they must obey or yield to this mystical authority, aka government. That's where, to me, that seems way more extreme than someone saying, sure, we want to live together peacefully, harmoniously, and find some ways to cohabitate and coexist together without using force or violence. But I'm not going to give anyone the pretense that, okay, now you have this concept of authority over me. That's kind of where I go with things.
Well, one of the things I was curious about when we agreed to talk was, I'm one of these guys that likes to start with some definitions.
Yeah, so for sure, yeah.
So I was actually curious about, you know, where you define government to start with. I didn't want to assume.
Right. Well, that's the thing with me, because just like with science and math and anything that would be considered to be objectively true, is I don't get to define it. That is actually one of the biggest problems I see today. And I guess postmodernists probably helped contribute to a lot of this stuff, although a lot of manipulation through our language as well. But we actually have predefined meanings. You know, that's the thing. Now, if you want to reinvent the wheel, you know, that's fine, but you're going to now be starting from scratch. But so to me, I just go by, because that's what people that are in government, everyone, and we were all educated, you know, based on, you know, whether it's the Oxford Dictionary or the Merriam-Webster, but they're still basically the wording might be slightly nuanced, slight differences and discrepancies, but they all basically acknowledge the same thing, that government, as the definition of what it means and what it has been under English, you know, the English language historically, is government is the monopoly of force of violence, like you said.
Okay, well, no, that's good. And I don't think I posted anything about that on ThinkSpot, but I do agree. So
I got your post right up here, actually. If you want me to quote it,
because it is something I believe. So it's
okay,
it's very possible that I did say that.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'll just quote you real quick, just so you know exactly what you said. So a state, and this is under your post, it's called Why Liberalism. Now, I'll skip the first paragraph, but the very next paragraph under that, you put a state, in quotations, is a compulsory political organization with centralized government that maintains a monopoly of the legitimate use of force within a certain geographical territory. For a state to be liberal, it must.
That's someone else that posted that. I mean, I wouldn't disagree, but I'm really sure. I think you may have that post mixed up with me.
Oh, are you not the one that posted the Why Liberalism then?
Nope.
Oh, okay. So, okay, sorry. Then that is my fault. I thought this was you. So which name? Because there was a couple of people, obviously, since I've been on here, there's been a few people that I've been conversing back and forth, and I was under the assumption, because I didn't know your name until just now, I was under the assumption that this was you. So what does your name under, like, who was I replying to? Was it your name, Adam?
Yeah, my username on ThinkSpot is AZW or AZW.
AZW. Okay, I'm just trying to look. Okay, well, anyways, so we'll just skip past that. But once again, you kind of basically said that you agree.
I do agree. Personally, I would agree that definition of a state and and a definition of a government is that body that reserves the use of, or that monopolizes the use of force. I think it's probably the best working definition.
Okay. So,
and
okay, go ahead.
And so if we agree on that, I could certainly understand the argument that it's better not to have a monopoly on the use of force. It's as good an argument as any other one.
Yeah.
But like any argument, it might fail to convince people. And so I would suggest that if you look at the history of the world, people do have an affinity for protection rackets.
Yeah. 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 Well, that I would completely agree with that. And that's when I talk to people about these things. To me, it's not a matter of I'm not offering a solution.
Mm-hmm.
I basically align it to, when you're raising your kids and especially if you're, from the Western countries and you raise them to believe in Santa Claus, let's say, right? At some point in time, you got to tell your kids, like, that guy with the white beard that living up, it doesn't really exist, right? And I think that's kind of, historically, I was completely on board with, even the advancements, even the post-Enlightenment era, even post-Reformation, all these things that we have advanced past, because even if you think about the concept of God, well, that was what people used as the overarching authority to get the masses to conform, right? To me, though, is in the 21st century, in the age of information, this would have never been something that I would have even considered or contemplated to be even a possible scenario, except for the fact that we live in the age of information, where all this information is literally at your fingertips. Historically, I love using the example, growing up even in the 70s and 80s when I was a young man, or still a kid, I should say, is even dictionaries. I remember my parents, it was like a $2,000+ investment. And if you were poor, a lot of people, you just didn't have dictionaries. But even that was quite an achievement if you had a full set of encyclopedias, so you could get yourself, much more knowledgeable than what you're going to be taught in your typical education systems or centers. To me, though, because we now have access to almost the breadth of all of human knowledge, all that great literature, all the novels, all the historical content, going from Adam Locke, or John Locke, Adam Smith, all these great minds of the Enlightenment era, we now have access to all this, or the Nobel-winning economists such as Hayek in terms of Austrian economics. Now that we all, there isn't this discrepancy anymore, and I mean, even in sub-Saharan African places have access to internet. So this is actually something that I think where humans can get to the point, and I think people like Jordan Peterson, people like Stefan Molyneux with his UPB, do you know who he is?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then of course, Ayn Rand with her objectivist philosophy. I think these were great stepping stones to try to get humanity, to get us past this concept of mysticism. Because like I say, look at how powerful the mysticists of the past used that, to enslave not just the minds of the minions, but in particular, those order followers who carried out the orders by sheer fact they felt that it was their inherent right to do so, or duty to do so, right?
What if I suggested that you might be reversing cause and effect? In other words, what if, would you consider it possible that that religion, let's say, the purpose of religion was not to enslave people?
Oh, it was? No, I'm not saying it was. I'm saying that
was there,
right?
And people would use whatever's there to influence or enslave others.
Right. Well, see, that is exactly, you're right on where I'm leading up to this, is the sheer fact that, like you say, just you could have used for good or bad. But to me, this is the part, like I say, the two forms of authority historically, or modern history anyways, basically since, the Greco-Roman times to today, is God or government, right? I mean, prior to that, it would have been solely God or gods, right? But God or government was this ultimate authority. The problem I see today is, now, obviously, the reason why we went through, the Enlightenment era was.
I'm not sure that it really. I'm really not sure that it's God or government. I think that, and I'm certainly far from an expert on this, but going by what I do know, I would suggest that that for many years, and even today, actually, I was just listening to a speech by Bloomberg today in his campaign, and it's clear that those who would govern feel it's necessary to make an appeal to God, and I also I live in Quebec, and so it's a fact that at various times organized religion collaborated with government in order to attain mutual benefit.
Right.
But, I have a tendency to look upon religion as something that those who would govern would exploit, the same as now, I'd suggest that people are exploiting other people's natural feelings of sympathy and empathy, or people's fears for future generations are being exploited. So I think there is an inevitable tendency towards corruption. I think that there will always be people who will seize upon whatever they can in order and exploit whatever they can in order to obtain power or influence over other people. And
Right.
and so I would think I would have a tendency to say, for what it's worth, that religion is just another one of those things. I don't think it was ever. It's an apples and oranges type comparison for me. I'm not sure I would compare it to government.
Right. Well, that actually, see, that's exactly, it's that bug in the matrix. It's that exception that God and government historically, both entities have always used. Like you say, because humans are fallible and because we're subject to, sophistry and people's ability to use the language in such manners, it's all about interpretation, right? Which is why, like I say, we're going back to Ayn Rand's objectivism, Stephen Molyneux's UPB, and even people like Jordan Peterson or not Dawkins, who's the other atheist guy, but even but even Weinstein, like Brent, they're all basically saying now we got to figure out this thing where we can take things out of the mystical realm where there is no longer that bug, that exception that allows the sophists or the authoritarians, right? That's the point to me. So before, God was used, I was raised in a religious family, and there's great moral teachings that I carry very dear to my heart to this day because of, thankfully, because my grandmother, she was a great woman, and she was the one that actually helped me along that way. It wasn't organized religion per se, because it was my grandmother that was very religious in nature, and she kind of went around to different churches. She wasn't beholden to one in particular, and she's seen all the discrepancies. And actually, even as a kid, I realized that, wait a minute, you're all reading from the same Bible here. What the heck? Why does everyone have all these? But that's what it comes down to, because we are fallible. We have, we're open to interpretation, which is why we got to get to, as humanity, like I was saying, in the age of information in the 21st century. And because we have all these people that have already laid down the foundation. Well, going all the way back to Aristotle, we now have the foundation where we got to find some way to have a universally consistent, something that's along the lines of mathematics, where people don't have to allow any exceptions. Like if you had math where you wanted to send a ship into space and it's 2 + 2 is 4, except here, right? Except this exception. Well, that the minute you create that exception, then might not work. The math might not work, and you're not going to get to your destination, or the potential is you're not going to get to your destination, depending on.
There is a problem with mathematics, right?
Okay, go ahead.
And the problem is that it's a closed system.
Right.
It's an axiomatic system, which means that it works by assuming blindly certain basic principles. And so mathematics doesn't work without blindly accepting certain basic principles.
Well, no, but you can test it, right? Like 2 + 2 being 4, and like you can even have a big long algebraic equation. But everyone, like I could perform the same task here, or someone 1,000 miles away, or someone on the other side of the planet can perform the exact same. Go ahead.
Yes, but it's only testable within the confines of its own system. And
yes,
that's what Gödel's incompleteness theorem is about.
Right, but even are you kind of going with even if the concept that we're just brains in a bucket, or this whole thing of postmodernism where, hey, this might not even be the real world, we might be just an experiment. Like I'm totally willing to accept that even though there are things that are outside of what's conceivable or perceivable as in terms of knowledge, in terms of humans at this point in time, but even if we're an experiment, the way I look at it, even if we're an experiment, we do have to function. The world that we were given, let's say, it does work on a certain set of principles. And we do know that if we use mathematics in the way of its original formulation, just like, I love using the example of, and Stephen Molyneux uses it too, is the Ptolemaic system. And then the fact that we know now the Earth's not the center of the universe. All these things that are based on the scientific knowledge and things such as mathematics allows every one of us to test out these hypotheses for ourselves. And like I say, they all work. Now, if there's something outside of us and we can't know, well, then how does that change the fact that you and we're going to live the rest of our lives, as far as I know, living on this planet, whether we're an experiment or whether you believe in the grand design of it.
They work enough. They're good enough. But, so let's take, for example, the most established, most proved, most universally accepted scientific theories.
Mm-hmm.
There's Einsteinian relativity on one end, and then there's what they call the standard model, which is quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics model on the other end. So both very solid theories, both very, very good at predicting certain types of things. Both of them equally useless at predicting things at the scale. So where quantum mechanics is successful, general relativity doesn't work at all. And where general relativity is successful at predicting things, quantum mechanics doesn't work at all. And then you have Newtonian physics in the middle, which, although everyone agrees it's wrong, works perfectly well for our everyday lives and is close enough so that you don't actually, for everyday life, you don't need to pay any attention to quantum mechanics or general relativity. Newtonian physics will get you through life fabulously. You can go to the moon on Newtonian physics.
Right. Well, what I'm saying, though, in terms of let's not try to get too far away from what we're talking about. So we're talking about government here, because I know so what I'm saying is the universal consistency of the NAP is, or if you want to use Stefan Molyneux's iteration of it called UPB, universal preferable behavior, or Ayn Rand's objectivist philosophy, whereas what you're doing is you're taking a principle, because that's what you're, even like in any endeavor, intellectual endeavor, if you're going to form a principle, well, then it has to be consistent in some way, right? Now, to me, the only things that have been proven to be possible that you can be universally consistent are things that are rights in terms of negative rights, not positive rights. Like when people say, I have a right to an education, well, that's literally to suggest that if you have a right to an education, that's to suggest that someone else should be deemed, they have to provide you with an education. Well, that's a form of enslavement. We can't agree with that, because if we're all entitled or have a right to enslave each other, well, then there's no such thing as enslaving, because we're all enslaving each other, right? So it goes back to that kind of circular logic, whereas negative rights, like I have the right to be free from force, coercion, or things that just like 2 + 2 being 4, well, they can be universally a principle. Like I say, so theft is wrong. That can be a foundationally consistent moral or ethic or principle that I believe. Now, it's not saying that everyone will accept it, but it is universal and consistent, which is, to me, go ahead.
So I might not go along with God or government, but what I would go along with is God or Locke, in so much as, what I hear you talking about now, in my mind, translates to the difference between natural rights versus legislated or ordained rights, or what's the word I'm looking for? Rights by fiat.
Right. Yes. Well, yes, of course. Yes.
Well, under God, rights are by fiat of God. Yes, no?
Well, that's the thing. It depends on what you're using as the concept of God, because to me, God is just an abstract concept. Just like when you say math, because he's like not believing. To me, it's a concept. Now, when I say that I like the ideal to believe in God, it's not like the picture of the guy with the long hair or whatever, like sitting on a cloud. So to me, it's a concept. It's an ideal, right? It's an abstract ideal. So as long as it meets, now, because of the interpretation, like you say, yes, people have used the concept of God for, but at some point in time, advance and mature to the point where this concept of God, which is just, once again, if you're going to have an authority, if it's in the abstract, right, just like math, nobody today would accept that someone's going to go in and reinvent mathematics. I mean, I suppose it is potentially possible, but I mean, a 0.000. So the foundation is already there. And like I say, it's a formulation that works out, as you kind of admitted to, for the most part, for everything that we do, whether it's achievements in science or technology or engineering. All these things help, and it does very well, as we've seen. That's why humans have advanced so far. But to be the concept of God, to me, if you're going to have a choice, now I would rather bring it into the modern 21st century where it's not called God or government anymore, but it's a new concept which is more easily observable, and people don't have to believe in any forms of mysticism. How it's going to play out, what people are going to coin it or call it, I have no idea, because I'm not a central planner. I'm not someone that's going to dictate how things are done. But I think humans are at the point, like I was kind of alluding to earlier, where we can kind of get to I think humans are kind of like still in our adolescent stage in terms of our intellectual development, in terms of morals, ethics, or how we should cohabitate, coexist, or treat each other. So that's why we still have these exceptions, and these exceptions are literally what have allowed for World War I, World War II, the state. I mean, people talk about it all the time. Oh, well, you need government to protect you from violence or people that will do harm to you. It's like governments is what does the most. No petty thief or even an organized crime group like the mafia pale in comparison to the victims or the bodies as a result of the belief in government. So to me, it's just, once again, getting humanity to the point and where we can figure it out so that it's simple for the layman all the way up to the highest idealist or intellectual on the planet, where we can all understand something that's universally consistent, where we don't have to place our faith in other human beings. If it's in the abstract, which is why I prefer it, tell you the truth, until humans get to the point where we can get this stuff figured out in a more of a scientific, objective base, if you give me a choice between God or government, at least the abstract government, doesn't have a real gun to come to my door tomorrow if I disagree, right? Like this is the problem with placing the hand or placing the belief in authority in other human beings, because now you've taken it out of the abstract and you've placed it in the hands of actual, real, tangible human beings that have real power.
So let's talk concretely, because I really would like to actually follow up on another thread, but we can get back to that later or do that another time.
Okay.
I'm very curious about why mysticism is such a problem for you, but let's now stick to the topic about government.
Okay.
Let me ask you, let me find the right word. So my initial thought, or let me do that. Let me describe the path my thoughts went down when I read what you had wrote. My thinking is that tyranny is an ongoing problem in the human condition, and one of the things that I strongly believe is that the Enlightenment and the English governmental system and the American governmental system, a lot of people would describe those things as having been focused on freedom and liberty. And for what it's worth, I actually think that there was probably, from what little I know, and again, I'm far from an expert, but it seems to me that the Enlightenment, English and American systems of government were actually more focused on the avoidance of tyranny than the positive. So it's the negative statement. So I think that I'll say this differently because I'm thinking out loud as I'm talking. Mm-hmm. What I believe is that these movements, these efforts that were undertaken by these collections of people, Enlightenment, British and American government, I believe that these people were realists. Mm-hmm. And they were very aware of and very focused on the limit of the world. And they weren't idealists. They may have had high ideals, and the ideals might have been liberty. But right. I don't think that there were only idealists. So I think that their idealism was certainly balanced by or tempered by a very, very healthy dose of realism and acceptance of the fact that we live in an imperfect world. And so that's what I base it on when I say that I think these things were more about the avoidance of tyranny. And I don't think they were about the total avoidance of tyranny. I think that they were compromise solutions that um, that were engineered to. I think that there was an assumption that humans and human hierarchical structures are unavoidably tend to corruption.
Mhm.
And I think that the effort was placed, therefore, not on the absolute and total avoidance of tyranny, the total liberty. I think a lot of effort was put into trying to figure out how to minimize and mitigate tyranny
Right.
to maximize individual liberties. And that's
I,
a really, really different statement. And
oh
it,
yeah.
it
Yes.
puts a
No.
really different light on the idea of government.
No, I totally get you, and I agree with you. And actually, the founding fathers and the U.S. Constitution drafted as a document, to me, especially for the time, it was actually an exceptional, and they did so well in terms of the divisions of power and all three branches, and be able to. The problem, as we've seen, though, is that exception, right? It's we still possess or maintain, and I get it. It's like for the time, 100%, you wouldn't have been able to get anything that I would even be suggesting or alluding to today in terms of trying to get past that point, because there still was a lot of mysticism. And I think how they did it worked out great. And fortunately, the other thing that was beneficial is they had a whole new landmass to try this particular experiment, right? So that was beneficial. Unfortunately, today, until we leave this planet or we start seasteading, we don't have anywhere left to try any of these new experiments, unfortunately. But yes, I agree for the time. I'm just saying it was that exception. It was the fact that they left that interpretation open, not saying they should or shouldn't have. Once again, this is not to suggest like for that time it wasn't well suited, and it worked out great. I mean, the U.S. started out as a very, very free country. The fact they set up militias rather than a standing army, that was beautiful. It was genius. It was done exceptionally. But as you see, what 200 years, and that seems to be a fairly consistent timeline. It only took a couple hundred years or so, and then you got this. Just like with regulatory capture, you got government capture of the authoritarians. Is once you've created that exception to the rule, like because government says you can't use force, violence, coercion, right? That's what it is. Like this is the rules of engagement, social economically. You can't steal from your neighbor. You can't, right? Which most people would agree to. The problem is once you've left an exception, for me, the government, is then you just got to get the right kind of people to go in and interpret things. Well, look at now. Look at the justice system. Look at the legislative system. Look at the executive. They're all interpreted now to just, it's whatever they decide at a particular time. I mean, they even openly admit now, which is hilarious because, it would have been taboo to admit this, I would say, even just 100 years ago, that hey, Trump said, hey, they got that fifth conservative on the Supreme Court. That literally telling you that it's not objective. It's based on their ideological preferences is how the decision making is going to happen through the Supreme Court. Is if you can get enough liberal judges, as they say, well, you'll probably get decisions that will lean more in the Democratic side of things. Whereas if you get the Republicans, well, so it's always open to interpretation. And in Canada, I think Canada is actually, because you're Canadian as well, I find using our own, not constitution, but the wording of our Charter Bill of Rights is a perfect example. And how once you leave that back door, even just to open a crack, well, they're going to find the authoritarians, the tyrants are going to find a way to not just crack it, but they're going to enter your house pretty quickly. And ours is called, the notwithstanding clause. So here's all your rights, here's all your freedoms, here's all your acknowledged liberties, and he even acknowledges in there, which I'm kind of proud of the fact that it does say in the Charter Bill of Rights that your God-given or inalienable rights, right? So it's supposed to place that, like they're even trying to admit, hey, we're not the ones that are defining rights. We're saying that this is just a reality of what it is to be a human being. These are your inherent rights, but we're just going to leave this nice little notwithstanding clause here just in case, right? Which, yes, if you only had good, upstanding, moral, ethical people, that the exception would only be used, for specific break glass in case of emergency, right? But that's not what happens. The authoritarians realize, those kind of people with that mindset realize that it's profoundly more difficult to try to enslave people, by going around door to door, house to house. Just take over the halls of authority, right? Take over all the branches of authority, and then you have the legitimacy. Then the people you don't have to worry about enslaving them. You don't have to have a million cops lined up and down the streets of all the states. They'll just conform because they believe in your authority, and by sheer fact that you're now the monopoly of force of violence. And if you don't, if you don't obey the authoritarian edicts of your political master, the biggest concern that most of us have to deal with is not just the fact, like myself, I don't believe in it, but all my neighbors, if the government of Canada decides tomorrow, well, actually, they're getting really, really to the point where they're cracking down on freedom of speech. If the government of Canada tomorrow says, listen, we can't allow these libertarians to talk about the fact that there's no such thing as legitimate government. If they come to take me away for a sheer fact of just all I'm doing, expressing things that I believe to be completely observably objective and consistent in terms of intellectual thought, well, they could take me away and no one's going to stop them, because all my neighbors believe it's their belief that, oh, well, that's the legit. If that authority says that Bennett should be deemed, an enemy of the state and taken and locked into a cage somewhere, I will be. And the judges will agree with it. The juries will, most of them will. Why? Because everyone has the belief in that authority. So to me, I get what you're saying. Pragmatic wise, totally understand. And the founding fathers, excellent. And I'm sure they even realize, actually, if you read some of the Federalist Papers, I think they basically acknowledge that, well, even what was it? Jefferson, wasn't it said that a republic, man, go ahead. Sorry.
I have to let a dog out. It's going to take me 2 seconds.
Oh yeah. Go for it. Yeah, sure.
Run outside. Come on. Up. Good boy.
Oh, let me just check the chat here while we're waiting then. Nice to see there's some people in
Sorry
there.
about that.
Thanks for everyone that has joined the chat so far. I didn't even put any notice on this, unfortunately, because I didn't know if you were going to show up or not.
Do it again another time. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, no, this is good. I'm actually enjoying our conversation, but if you want to even just push back against anything I just said there, go right ahead.
Well, so there's a couple of things that come to mind, as I was listening to. The first one is the point that I was making, I suppose, about founding fathers and Enlightenment thinkers is there's a pragmatic question as well as a philosophical or ideological question.
Right.
And so if we're talking about the legitimacy of governments, I would suggest that it's possible that all governments might be ideologically or philosophically illegitimate, but pragmatically legitimate.
Right. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So that's one thing that popped into my mind. The other thing that popped into my mind is that it's probably likely that at any point in time, there's some group of people who feel like government has been captured by an authoritarian minority. And it just happens to be our turn to feel that way.
Well, no, but like I just use the best example ever is taxation is theft. I mean, and that to me, it doesn't matter what group or your background, your history, your heritage, your race, your sex. It's that nobody would believe, like 100 years ago. Well, I mean, in Canada, it was 1917 before we had such things as an income tax. But look, multiple generations. And I mean, there's people were outraged even then. How dare you? And what was it? 3% and 4% for corporations, I believe it was, and 3% for some of the, people that had money to actually pay. But now we're to the point where government, and I think it was the Fraser Institute, put it out, their latest study, it's what 46% of a typical person's average, mind you, so discrepancies there obviously, but for an average household or individual income, you're looking at roughly 46% of your income that go towards taxes. But then if you take your housing, housing, clothing, and food, right? So basically the staples, the necessities just to live, right? The basic necessities. Forget about all your extracurricular activities and all these modern amenities and things that we have at our disposal. Just to live is only 42%. So the government now taxes a person in excess of what you even have to spend to survive or thrive, which tells me, and this is why another post I put up and people loved it. I like to get to people thinking, that's what I like to do, but slavery, right? Human ownership was something that was actually accepted. It actually only happened because government made it legal to do so. It was legal to own slaves. That was the point. But today we would all, except for like some really rare exceptions, some pretty vile people, we would all accept that slavery, actual human ownership, is wrong. It's immoral. It's unethical. The whole spiel. But obviously people don't believe that because they're allowing it. What's the difference? Basically what I've done just for a quick math is because of that 42 and the 46%. So that's 80. That leaves 12% left over, I guess, for your discretionary spending. So what? We're 12% away, because even when there was real human ownership and you lived on a plantation, well, the master, like, you had to have food because you couldn't pick the cotton without food. You had to survive. You had to have food. You had to have clothing to protect yourself from the elements, and you had to. Sorry, go ahead.
I follow what you're saying. There's a clear case of slavery where someone can be bought and sold, like so chattel slavery, but forced labor is legitimately also considered slavery. So working and not receiving compensation for the work you do. So I follow what you're saying. Let's actually talk about that, because those were in your article on ThinkSpot. That's the example you gave. Is it legitimate for me to come and take your money?
Yes.
So, a few things popped into my head when I read that. So let's say that. So first of all, the first question I'll ask is, in the absence of government,
right?
What are your feelings about possession being 9/10 of the law? So in the absence of government, what constitutes theft and what constitutes my property versus anyone else's property?
Well, obviously, because I'm a libertarian, I start from the base fundamental of self-ownerships, and then self-ownership extends to property rights. Because if I own myself, by natural extension of the fact, and like I say, that's a pretty baseline, something that I think most people that exist, that I own myself. Nobody gets to claim ownership over me. So by natural extension of self-ownership, and then of course the property rights that entail that, if I build, construct, or I use my mind, that's another thing. It doesn't have to just be in me working in labor and toiling. Maybe I come up with an idea, like a concept and I get investors and create some capitalist venture and create some product or a service. Anything by that natural extension that I've created, well, it's mine. Nobody has.
Let me suggest. Let's say that through my superior intellect, I trick you out of half of your life savings.
Right. You trick. What do you mean? Like no, but you would have to kind of set it up, because there would have to be something that we actually had to.
Let's do a confidence, man, and I do a classic confidence game on you. I make you believe that you're going to get $1 million if you give me $50,000 to facilitate.
Oh, one of those scams. Oh, are you from Nigeria? No, just kidding.
Yeah. So let's say I do that.
Yeah.
I've used my superior intellect,
right,
in order to obtain money. You willingly gave it to me because you're a greedy person and you wanted to make $1 million and you didn't exercise much critical thinking about it.
Well, if it's just one of those things that you just happened to, I guess, like a phone, one of those phone scams, and you called up.
Sure, let's say I did it in person. Let's say I met you at the coffee shop and I got to know you, and because I'm a person who doesn't have any ethical qualms about that.
Right.
And so I have a later example that we could talk about, which involves violence. But I figured we'd start with an example that didn't involve violence. So through my own wherewithal, my own intellect, my own ability to talk convincingly to other people, and through your weakness of character and low moral standing, I end up with half of your life savings. I mean, this is like
no. I hear you. To me, what I would say, of course, I think a little more information would probably be required to make an actual well-informed decision on that. But just based on the loose description of how you say they've set up, well, the onus would be on me, right? It's personal responsibility. If I didn't like. It's the same if there's a bad area in downtown Toronto, which there are, right down there, Queen Street, let's say, and I got a big wad of money hanging out of my back pocket for everyone to see. Well, of course, it was wrong. It was immoral for that person to steal my money, right? And of course, I would want to do what I can to get that money back, maybe enlist some help from other people, maybe trick that guy or, whatever. I'm fine with that, because
that's exactly where I'm going with this.
Yeah. So, but to me, I have to be personally responsible enough, just like I would hold with people in my own family. It's like, you have to be responsible enough that you're not walking down the street, right, with money hanging on your pocket in an area that you know that's going to leave you subject to potential theft, right? And that could be escalated up higher if you try to defend yourself from such theft. So that, to me, and that's where government kind of destroys personal responsibility and accountability. That is another aspect that I see today that has a profound effect on even our social adhesion or our community adhesion or cultures. Everyone just offloads the responsibilities onto this mystical entity of government, right? That's actually a terrible precedent to set, because now you don't know how it's going. Sorry, go ahead.
Jump into an end conclusion. I don't want to jump away from the actual question yet.
Right.
So I, either through force or through guile, I somehow separate you from your money. Now it's my money. Or is it?
Well, no, but you say if it's through force, then obviously, you should be able to use, whether it's, I mean, people have used the terminology DROs, or if you just want to use force yourself to get your money back. I mean, I would say that's completely acceptable. Actually, it's the only way, actually the best deterrent, when people even talk about the police or law enforcement. Police don't prevent crimes. I mean, unless just by happenstance, they're luckily in the exact place at the right time when an actual theft is going down, right? No, they come along later, they take the report, and then they what? Go after to try to investigate and find out who stole it and possibly try to get your money back.
When I get a bunch of my friends together, because
right,
you obviously can overpower me when I'm alone. You did.
Right.
So I get a bunch of my friends together and I come after you, and I come to get money which you consider yours, but I consider mine.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I have to pay a few people. Maybe I don't have that many friends. Maybe I tell a bunch of people, that guy has $1,000 of my money. If you come with me, I'll give you 200 each.
Mm-hmm.
So that description doesn't sound a whole lot different than government to me.
Well, no, it does, because nobody would believe for 1 second that person that stole your money or tricked or manipulated you, nobody's going to believe that they have any authority to do so. That's the difference. See, the difference between these experiments or these thought experiments of just some person coming and taking your money or
it's a thought experiment for me. I mean, this is a real situation.
Yeah, okay, but in a real situation, like I say, if someone dupes me, and this happens all the time, then at least I don't believe that they had any legal claim to do it. We all know, and I know, and I accept the fact that this person tricked me and duped me out of my money. So I would, knowing that this is.
Let me go one step further. So
Yeah.
me and this group of friends that I got together to get my money back.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out that we know that you also jumped 5 other people that day in the alley and took their money too.
Yeah.
And we decided we want to put you out of business. We don't like the fact that you're taking people's money away from them in the alley. Now that I'm aware that you're doing it,
Right.
I say, okay, we're going to, what are we going to do? I don't know. We're going to chop off your hands? Are we going to ride you to the edge of town and tell you don't come back or we're going to kill you? But what is the legitimate way? I mean, first of all, maybe it's illegitimate of us to want to stop you. Maybe I should mind my own business and not worry about what you do to other people. Or maybe I should worry about what you do to my friends and neighbors and possibly my children. And maybe I should take some kind of action. And if I am going to take that action, what legitimizes how much action I take? And this is where you raised Jordan Peterson before. I think of all the people that you mentioned, I think Jordan Peterson has the most interesting things to say about that situation.
Right. Okay, but what I was trying to get to when you're bringing up these hypotheticals, or they do happen in real life, obviously, but for this purpose of this conversation, it's a hypothetical scenario you're setting up. But what I'm saying is, there's no pretense that person has any authority. And because we all recognize and acknowledge, or most people do, that theft is immoral, and it can be proven to be universally consistent in terms of an ethic, right? That's all that matters. How it plays out, all these scenarios, like people love doing this, especially, and I get it, because libertarians are supposed to have the answer to which is it's completely foolish. So to me, there's a principle, right? The principle is theft is wrong. How any possible scenario plays out, how many people, whether it's a gang of people, whether it's one person, whether they rob 10 people or rather they rob 1,000, is the whole point to me is the principle is, if theft is wrong, then it has to be universalized to the point where we can't give anyone the exception to that rule, because the minute you've given someone the exception and it's okay for them to perform theft, well, they're going to be the ones that's going to do the most theft, right? Because now they don't even have to work like these politicians. Like, if you look at the politicians in Ottawa, none of these people would ever have the balls or courage to come up and take one dime from me. Not one of them. Because they know the minute I see, yeah, you come take my money, you're going to see what happened. But because everyone in my community believes, oh, it's okay for them to take my money, or my employer, if I'm working for an employer.
So it sounds to me like you are arguing that there is an implied authority if I come with 5 friends to get my money back. You're saying that there's a moral authority which, is granted by the community consensus.
Yes. So that's why I say when we get back to the whole concept of God, right? An abstract is, yes, there has to be a moral authority of sorts.
I'm actually on the same page with you on this one.
Right.
I think that there are aspects, and I'll jump to the conclusion, and we can come back and walk our way through if you want again. But what I'm going to say,
no, but can I just say this real quick? Because when you say that authority, where I agree with you is yes, but the only way that authority works is if it's universal and consistent, right? Right. Government completely destroys that, because government says you're not allowed to steal, but I can. See, the minute there's an exception there, it's like, that's not an authority, because an authority means we're all held to the same standard. That's what I'm saying.
Idealistically, yes. Practically, I'm not sure if that's possible, first of all.
To me, it's not a matter of whether it's possible. Like, when I talk about these things, actually, I should have premised this before we even get into the conversation. This is just food for thought. How this plays out, how the world unfolds, and like, as a libertarian, but I'm also pragmatic. I don't believe in voting either. I believe it's crazy, but I've done it. Last election, I usually don't actually, but last election, because I didn't like the way the establishment and everything was, and the direction of this country, I actually doesn't mean that I've now turned into a statist, or now I somehow am a big believer. But I am pragmatic enough that yes, I'm not going to be foolish or naive enough to just sit on the sidelines while everything's crashing down. Of course, you're going to try whatever means are at your disposal. To me, is the purpose and the point of having these kind of discussions is, like I say, before the Reformation happened, or just before the Enlightenment era, original Enlightenment era happened, is you had to have these very profound, in-depth discussions so that we could figure out better. And like I say, the founding fathers, or a lot of people, like you say, from Britain or Great Britain, like the UK and Scottish in particular, there were some great ideas, or on the German Austrian side.
That's exactly why I want to have a conversation with you.
Yes, and this is, to me, this is where actually I think why. It's really hard, because that's the problem with this divide. Is I would love to have a discussion. A lot of the times I end up having discussions with people that identify also as libertarians, liberals, or conservatives, or I want to have a discussion with this, because I'm telling you, what I firmly believe is that most people, when I see like groups like Antifa or communists or socialists, listen, they're pointing out the exact same things that I'm pointing out, like how detrimental this current a lot of people. Like, where we diverge is this concept. Okay, government is bad, but they want to use government to win battle, and so all you're doing is going. To me, it's that constant, the revolution thing, right? Which is why I coined my own little phrase. I call it, and actually, it's on my thing spot. Actually, I use it for the cover. Is we require evolution, like intellectual evolution, not revolution, because even just by sheer fact of, what revolution, you start here and you end up back at the same point. That's what a revolution is, folks. You end basically at maybe not exactly, because the planet might be moving away, so it's not the exact same, but you're still kind of end up back. It's the same kind of circular logic that you're going to have. That's why you keep going through these. And I'm thinking, now that we live in the age of information, let's figure out a way so we can all point out the discrepancies and the hypocrisies of what government represents. And if we want to call it whatever you want to call it, I don't care. But you can't really use the term government, because government has an actual defined meaning. But whatever you want to call this thing that should be the final arbiter of the disputes or have some pretense of authority, I'm all for it. I'm not rejecting authority. I'm rejecting any authority that leaves that exception clause. That's all it is. Because to me, for something to be authority, sorry, go ahead.
So let me kick into your. It sounds like I think I've understood the heart of where this is for you is around the universal principle, and And I'm happy to share with you my universal principle.
Okay.
I believe that we live in a universe of choice. I believe that's what distinguishes our universe.
Well, I'm glad you believe in free will. That's good.
But I believe we live in a universe of choice, um, and that is the beginning and maybe the ending of the universality for me. And so, by my own personal standards, what follows right after that is um, the worst thing to do is to limit someone else's choice, because I don't want anyone to limit mine.
Right.
And I also feel pretty much identically to you as regards the responsibility for my choices. The example you gave of walking into a bad neighborhood is the example. I use that example all the time.
Do you? Oh, right on. That's awesome.
So that's for me. Now the problem is that that's my belief of what's universal. There are probably a lot of people who would not agree with me, and it's just the nature of our existence that I think would be hard to press to, although some of us might believe there are universals, and I believe there are universals, and I've worked in a lot of different countries and with a lot of different people,
right.
and I can say that. I'm very aware that nothing in human existence is so universal that you can get every single human to agree with it.
Well, no, actually, you know what? Can I just answer? Because I'll probably forget if I don't, but that's actually perfect. That's why freedom of association without this, the problem with government is it's forced association. That's what government does, is it basically forces us to associate.
Well, that's where I was going.
Yeah.
I'm so sure it is forced association.
Sorry, what was that?
I'm really not so sure it is forced association.
Well, it is, because we're all treated under the umbrella of that we have to deal, like, if we didn't have government and people that were, like I say, that were libertarians or anarchists or people that just rejected the mysticism authority in terms of central planning and stuff, then you could associate with whoever and you could move. The beautiful thing about sovereignty, not of the state, but sovereignty of the individual, is you would have the choice. Because like I say, I accept wholly that there's going to always be bad people. That's never going to change. There's no such thing as this utopian ideal where we're all going to live kumbaya, right? All us libertarians and never, yay, there's no longer any force or violence. That's I don't believe that's ever going to happen. I should say never, but not in time that I could see in the immediate future, that's for sure. But if we didn't have to function under like this one, like in Canada, there's federal laws that we're all beholden or have to obey. And
my choice is to leave Canada.
What's that?
If I object to the Canadian system of government, and if I object to the Canadian level of taxation, there are other places in this world I could go. Or I could, alternately, Canada's a very large place. If I was really dedicated, I probably could stay in Canada and avoid all those things. But I'd be giving up living in society.
Well,
but that's the choice. The choice is if you're truly not happy with the way society has organized itself, you can either try and change it from within, valid, or you could choose to just leave it and live without it. And I don't think that there's anything in Canada that would really prevent a person from leaving Canadian society.
Well, no, but that's what you're saying though is just like the example. Have you ever watched a gentleman named Larkin Rose?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, he's self-described anarchist out of the United States, and actually did a really great job with making some very simple videos. What I like to see is videos that are very simple and acceptable and watchable and understandable by the typical layman. Is the example of the Jones plantation, right? Which is perfectly, apt explaining government is. Now we're going to bring in Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones. We're going to choose up who's going to be the plantation owner. And you're no longer slaves anymore, and more or less is how they've set this up, is now you're a free man. Now you can leave the plantation anytime you want, but just to let you know, wherever you go, there's other plantations. At least here, we're going to say that you get. So, of course, people can use the concept of government owning this land. And therefore, if you don't accept the rules of the Canadian government, well, you could always go. But all you're saying is you're going to jump out of the fire into the frying pan, or out of the frying pan. There is nowhere in the world yet. I mean, Antarctica. I mean, first of all, am I going to get back the, however many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever? There
are definitely places on the planet without functional government where the law of the jungle rules.
Right. Yeah. But that's the thing. I'm not about law of the jungle. Like, I want to be in a society of people that accept. That's why I'm a libertarian. Like, that's why I don't identify as an anarchist, because the problem with anarchists, and I get along great with them in terms of, like I say, pointing out what's wrong. The problem with anarchists, and I guess this might come from my Christian upbringing, is you got nothing, or just perfectly goes along with Nietzsche and what he said. Well, we've killed God. Well, now what have you replaced it? You replaced it with absolutely nothing. Why I identify as a libertarian, not an anarchist, is because libertarians actually leave some formulation, right? That's the point of self-ownership, the property rights, and the NAP. That does at least give you, some base code in how you can cohabitate and coexist without using force or violence. And that's usually works out. Doesn't mean it's always going to be perfect, but that works out for most people most of the time. So to me, that's, whereas anarchists, okay, you're rejecting the state, and you also reject, a lot of the anarchists would identify as atheists too. Okay, so you reject God as an authority, you reject government as an authority, but you're not replacing any authority. And as you kind of alluded to earlier, is there has to be some kind of authority if we have any hope of living outside of the state of nature, or as Jungle, might makes right. And I don't want to live in a pure state of nature of might makes right. I'm a modern human being with a fairly advanced mind that doesn't fall for that knuckle dragging power grab scenario, right?
I think I understand your position. Let me bounce it back, and you tell me if I'm in the right place.
Okay.
So what I understand you telling or saying to me is that that as a pragmatist, you've made a choice to live in society, in this society as it is, and contribute. I think I would also add that you decided to contribute, even just by having these kinds of public discussions. That's your form of contribution.
Right.
You decided to live in and contribute to society at a pragmatic level. However, you feel that it's worthwhile challenging and let's say challenging some basic aspects of the society as it is, and you do so without necessarily proposing a replacement or even pretending to know what the replacement should be.
Yeah.
Simply with the idea that by having the discussion about it in the first place, something better might emerge. Am I getting you?
Well, here's kind of what I'm saying. So I live in Canada, right? And as a libertarian, because I accept and adhere to, like, the fundamental aspects of self-ownership, property rights, and NAP, all I'm saying is, in terms, especially when people say, because this is the problem with the circular logic of government and taxation is, okay, well, you can't drive on the roads, or you can't go. Okay, like, listen, if there was an option, here's the problem is, this forced association stuff, is if I was given the option, or people like myself are given the option, that we can, build our own roads, get together and do our own thing, then to me, it's, I will accept if I can't gain some of the benefits through these forced associations or these forced wealth and income redistribution schemes. I'm saying I'm totally willing to accept normal laws in terms of ethics, like proper laws under British common law. It's, don't hit, don't steal. Like, these things have been since Magna Carta. I mean, 800 years, and it's taken a long time, but we understand most, like, I could function within this country. I'm just saying, don't allow, like, the government shouldn't be able to just steal from me and take, because there's no way for me to hold government. I want to be able to enter into, when they say the social contract, and of course, you talk about people like such as Lysander Spooner and such, is there is, I mean, it's an ideal. And I mean, if I wanted to enter into it, that would be fine. But because I didn't, like, if I could sign the agreement, if there was an actual tangible agreement that I have signed, and you could see the signature of whoever the people who are in charge and my signature, and let's say every time there's a new government, it's like, oh, are you still signed up with this? Are you still good with that? I should at least, if I don't have an opt-in, opt-out option, then that's what I'm saying is,
we're hitting what is the very heart of the matter for me.
Right.
So the very heart of the matter is that under the forms of government that we have, I believe that what we're signing up for is we're signing up to compromise and live with other people's values to a certain extent in exchange for having more important and more basic values respected by all. And I think that's the contract, the societal contract that especially people who are libertarians make with societies that I've signed up by staying here, by not going off the grid, by not becoming completely sovereign. I am signing up for a form of civilized existence where I agree to compromise on a daily basis.
Well, it's not like I agree. I'm forced, right? Because there, like I say, we live on it. Like if you want to just, whether you want to call them plantations or farms, right? The entire planet, except for, like I say, Antarctica or some places where there's basically the places that aren't built up now. There's a reason why they're not built up, because it requires a tremendous amount of money, effort, engineering, and infrastructure.
You're forced to breathe air. You're forced to eat. I mean, there are certain things you're supposed to do.
Well, no, but that's just to survive, is to breathe air, to eat. But I'm forced to pay in to, like I say, taxation, because taxation is probably the most easily understood example that people can use.
What's available? Like, let's say I would just suggest that you're forced to eat either plants or animals. You have no other option of something to eat.
Yeah, but there's nobody forcing me. It's just by if I want to live, right?
So I'm not sure there is anybody forcing you in terms of society. That is how society's evolved. That is what we got. And I don't think that there was a master planner of today's societies either. It was a consensual arrangement for the most part. Certainly the kind of democracies or republics in which we live were slowly evolved through some form of consensus, agreement. Certainly these aren't governments that were created by tyranny, the ones we live in.
They weren't. Well, it depends on where your subjective stance is. If you're some of the First Nations people, then you might suggest otherwise. But to me, it's either here or there, because just like I covered it.
If you were a native and you were saying that you were forced, then I'd have a different reaction.
But see, that's the thing. To me, it's not one bit of difference. I'm a human being. That's what I mean. Either we believe in principles, or once again, I've even said this before, especially people that lean more towards anarchism or stuff. Listen, if you want to live in the state of nature, I'm actually one of those people that I'd be okay in that situation. I've done pretty good in terms of my physical prowess. I can handle myself, and I know how to use in the state of nature. I'd actually be much more higher in this hierarchy than I'm totally fine with not using. My thing is I accept the principle is that I don't use force, violence, or theft towards my fellow man, woman. I've accepted that. And because government goes against that principle, then that's to suggest that we are back to, I love using the example. There are anarchists all around us, but they work in government because they don't have to follow. When you're the one that writes the rule, as we've seen multiple times, who do you think is benefiting from all these rules that are written and these clauses, or corporations? And
the pragmatism of the founding fathers. I believe that the founding fathers, like I said, I'm half American. I believe the founding fathers didn't create a system that completely eliminated corruption. I think they created a system that contains it and minimizes it.
Well, that was the intention, right?
Yeah.
But if you think about when that document was drafted, right, in the 1700s, look at a couple hundred years later. I mean, if the founding fathers, if you could bring them out of their long slumber, they'd be like, wait, this is nothing like what we set up. This is the problem.
Yeah, actually, I think there are certain aspects of what goes on now that the founding fathers would agree with. So,
there would be some. Oh yeah, I didn't say nothing entirely, but I'm saying if they look now, there was no such thing as an income tax when they set this. That's it was a 3% on tax on tea in England, which was not solely, of course, but that was one of the main contributing factors why they rallied against the king. What?
I think the jury is out in terms of the robustness of the system. I think it's too soon to tell whether or not the experiment was a good one. We're only a few hundred years into it.
I think it was a great experiment, but like I say, if you go by right now at this, and if you look at the rate of progression in terms of more creeping towards tyranny and authoritarianism, you can see there might be points where that's dipped up, but if you span that trajectory out long enough over the entire time frame, you'll see the amount of laws that government had at the time, which simple laws, much easier. That's why actually the country grew so quickly and so rapidly, is because you had more free market oriented basis for their economic transaction, and you had minimal rules in terms of social engagement. Right? What's that?
Could change. Well, in the United States, there may be a convention of the states, and the convention of the states may eliminate mountains of federal regulation. I tend to look at things as more of a pendulum swing than a trend usually. I don't think it's out of the question that the experiment may end up showing to us that there's a pendulum swing.
I would love to think that, but can you name one time in history where through government without going through, and unfortunately, I'm not, once again, not advocating for revolution. I prefer the evolution, because then no force needs to happen, right? That's my endeavor. Not saying it's going to work out. I'm just one guy just trying my thing here, but I'm saying, at what point in time do we ever get that where the government just starts, or people that want to go into government, especially at this late stage of development, when it starts to get more into the decay side of things, just like under the Roman Empire, where you have the worst governments become is now that it's gravitating even the more vile and evil people in society to gravitate towards that structure, because, well, look at that. Look, I can enrich myself and my buddies to such a great degree. So, but I don't know at any point in time where, now I'm not saying this can't happen.
I mean, if you look up American history, look up the Teapot Dome scandal. I mean, that was a point in time at which, if you would have asked people, they would have said to you, government could not possibly get more corrupt than it is at this very moment.
Yeah. And yet, right? And yet,
but there was a swing. I mean, there was I really believe that, well, I believe it's too soon to tell, is what I believe. I believe that, that the form of government, well, I'll add one thing to it, because we're talking about Peterson. The thing that Peterson says that I think is interesting, as it applies to government, is the whole concept he has of merit hierarchies, and how humans form merit hierarchies where they essentially vote through action, not through votes, but just on the basis of what they accept and how they act. That humans will vote in merit-based hierarchical leaders. And so I think that the Enlightenment thinkers and the founding fathers in the U.S. were of an identical mind as Dr. Peterson in this regard. I believe that the principle upon which they were acting was that although people have a natural tendency to act in their self-interest and live by the law of the jungle, if you create a system where there's a certain amount of peer pressure amongst the hierarchical leaders, that they'll exercise some regulation on each other, much in the sense that when he is part of this whole election of hierarchical leaders, he talks about how chimpanzee troops work and how tyrannical chimpanzees don't last.
Yeah,
chimpanzees form alliances. So I think that the societies that we live in, you and I, these Western democratic societies, although we both understand that's a vast oversimplification.
Yeah,
not so much about democracy,
right?
But let's call them Western democratic societies for to keep it simple. Okay. I think that the people that form these societies form them on that exact same principle, which is the only way to combat strong-willed people's natural tendency towards tyranny is to put them in some kind of group where they act as a moderating force on each other.
Right. Well, I actually totally agree with that. And actually, but that's the thing. You don't need government for that. Actually, one thing about, how old are you?
I'm 55.
Sorry?
I'm actually a little bit more. What am I? I am 50. It's terrible. I should know this off by heart. Born in 63, and I'm very bad with math.
Oh, so actually you're just on that trailing edge of the boomer. All I was trying to get to is, as a Gen Xer, I'm 49. But kind of on the older side of the Gen Xers. But what I realized is, because we seem to be that last generation, and we're all referred to, we're such a small demographic in terms of the size, but we were the ones, and people refer to this all the time. You've probably heard it, latchkey kids, right? It was It was that.
What?
It was the fact that a lot of our mothers, right? They were all gone out to work. Dad was doing his thing. So we basically lived in this state of nature, like, well, anarchy, I guess you might want to call it. And it was those developments. Now, of course, I have to also take into account a lot of us also had religious upbringing as well. So everyone kind of at least had some firm grasp or understanding between right and wrong, in some degree. But if you went out in the middle of the woods, even with a dozen kids from different backgrounds, like whether some come from rich families, some real dirt poor, but yes, just by fact of having to cohabitate with each other, yes, you eventually find a way. But rather than a top-down structure, all, not just humans, but animals, like everyone will find some way. And like I say, there's always going to be that exception out there where someone's going to do the wrong thing and be evil. To me, it's like, I don't believe in the concept of utopia where we're not going to have any potential threats. But at least when you don't, like, none of our groups said, okay, now there was natural hierarchies. So the most knowledgeable or the most moral of the group would be acceptable. Well, hey, if we want to know what's right and wrong, well, Bennett seems to understand this stuff better. So, but it wasn't this pretense that, I must subjugate myself to Bennett. Yes. So I believe in natural hierarchies 100%. The problem is, though, for me to have that hierarchy in terms of, let's say everyone in my community deems me as the most moral. The only way that would come to exist in real life is if I had a clear track record and history of someone, at least from what everyone could see. I could have been doing things behind people's back that nobody knows, but from what everyone would be able to observe, the reason why I would have this natural hierarchy in terms of my moral competence is I've shown that I led by example. People in government, this is the crazy part. It's like the preachers, like when I was going to church when I was a kid, it's like the preacher pounding on the pulpit saying, murder is wrong. And yet, as soon as he leaves the church, he's out there freaking killing all. It's like, wait, hold her now. I don't think this guy naturally would be proper in this hierarchy of morality. Because look, he's a murderer talking about how that's to me. That's the problem with government is people that try to talk as if they're this moral authority, like based on our laws and our judicial system. Yet they do exactly the opposite of being moral or ethic themselves. So yeah, I'm all for like a hierarchy of competence in many ways, like, intellectually. I mean, there's lots of hierarchies of competence or of knowledge, and I'm all for that. But it's the free market. It's the ability for us to be free to choose to associate. Just like in my community, as a libertarian, if we lived in a more free associative type of society, then I could choose to move. And if we had actual genuine sovereignty, where it wasn't just Canada as this overarching, everybody one size fits all, we could have tons of social experiments of people, and you would see which one works best. Just like in the product world, right? You know which ones are going to sell by sheer fact of having some competitive models.
And that was
to me, the ones that like their authoritarianism or more strict, you go do that. And if you like taxation,
that was the original intent behind the United States.
Yes, exactly.
And as a pragmatist, even as a pragmatist, I do believe that one change that we can hope for, that I can hope for, is a reduction. I think a lot of people misunderstand the term reduction in government. It's not that the government is too large; it's that the government is too far away. And so, I do believe that what you want is government that's closer to the people that it governs and that it's supposed to serve. Well, so that's my objection to the EU, for example. That's why I'm proud of Britain for leaving the EU. It's too far away, too distant.
Me too, but you know what? As soon as I get the people of the UK to think, all right, he's on board with the UK, but if you're a Scottish nationalist or an Irish, I'm with you there too. You know what I mean? That's the thing. I'm all about sovereignty.
I think, I really, the older I get, and the more experience I have, and the more I see the world, the more I believe that the people should be really reluctant and really careful about consolidated government. And I can, the United States were formed with the intent of securing borders and facilitating free trade.
Right.
Great idea. I can see how everybody in every state should want that.
Yes.
But the more intrusive it's become, the more every state is supposed to be like every other state.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I know we would agree on that point. I know that, yeah, it's clear to me that we would agree on this issue.
Yeah. Well, when I talk to people, especially when they start talking about sovereigns, right? So you're talking about First Nation people as a sovereign nation, or the government of Canada federally as a sovereign. To me, no, I'm all about sovereignty, but ultimately, for us humans to be able to live as peacefully and harmoniously as possible, not saying it's always going to work out though, is that sovereignty has to be expanded out to all 7+ billion. That's when, because then you have the idea, the concept where now we don't have forced association or collectivism as the overarching pretense in how we deal with each other. If we're all acknowledged as sovereign individuals, but yet if we want to enter into agreements, whether it's in a small locality, a community, or whatever you want to call them. To me, I don't care what you want to call them. But as long as we can do these things where we have an opt-in, opt-out, and everything's done voluntarily, then, like I say, the people that are want more heavy regulations on their economy, let's say, you go right ahead and do it. But what they'll probably obviously notice, if there's a such thing as, let's say, a libertarian community just a few miles over, let's say, what they would probably recognize quite instinctively and quite readily is, oh, look, they got a whole lot more. Geez, they're almost into flying ships here now, and we're still banging rocks and sticks together. Right?
Well, that leads to what people are afraid of. The reason why people are afraid of small localized government is because of war.
Right.
So, the EU, in some ways, started with the best of intentions. Right. It was the horror of war, of World War I, which started for no good reason at all, and devastated Europe and put it back by hundreds of, maybe even 1,000 years back.
Yeah.
So here you have this completely ridiculous war, which only really started because of state sovereignty, the whole concept of sovereignty. So I understand, just as I think that we'd be well advised to learn the lessons of practical communism, I do think that we also have to bear in mind the lessons that we should have learned from small states and sovereignty. Back to my original statement, there's no easy answer. There's no clear answer. So
right.
Although I favor small government and local government, I'm not immune to the idea that without an overarching federal government, there could be war.
Right. Well, there's two things, though, I think that we have at our disposal in the modern 21st century that has shown a very clear and concise, and actually the European Union was actually more set up along this line. The first one has nothing to do with the European Union, but mutually assured destruction based on, nuclear proliferation. That alone is a pretty good deterrent, because it's like 10 guys in a bar in Texas that are all got their 45s on the side. You actually, if you walked into that bar, you'd be like, damn, these are some of the freaking nicest people. Why? Because they all have equal ability, right? To cause harm to each other. Actually, that keeps us on an even keel much better than giving that one guy. The minute you've given that one guy in the room, right? Everyone else got a little 22 and that one guy's got the 45, right? It's like, oh, that's the guy you better watch out for. Now we're right.
Yes and no, though, because I would say that there's an additional element that you're not taking into consideration.
What's that?
So, if everybody's armed at a practical level, or at the level of physical force, let's say we're all equal, the big equalizer, right?
Right.
But at the level of readiness to use violence, we are not all created equal, and we never will be.
No,
and
of course.
In that bar of 10 people, well, 10's a small number, but if that bar was full of 1,000 people, there would be one who's flat out psychopathic, doesn't care.
Right, but just like that monkey example you were going to use, or the chimpanzees, the minute that one guy, because the rest of the troop wouldn't believe that guy has a legitimate, that's the thing with government. Now, if everyone believed that that person had the authority to do that, then everyone else would be the other 999.
I would argue that it has to get really bad first. And that's why we have the kind of government we have today, is because, yes, if you push it too far, eventually we will revolt.
Mm-hmm.
But for a little while, that psychopath is going to boss around the 1,000 other people in the bar before they decided they've had enough.
It's same with government.
Yeah, because the rational, the reasonable people are going to go, maybe he's not really a psychopath, or am I justified in banding together with 5 of my friends to blow him away? There's going to be reticence, and because there's reticence, which is a good thing, What happens is, and this is what I believe, back to what I believe the Enlightenment thinkers and the founding fathers were coming from, is because reasonable people will have reticence to use unreasonable force, there's always a window of opportunity, a period of time in which the psychopathic, the despotic, the tyrants can exercise tyranny. And if you nip it in the bud early enough, you're the lucky one. And if you take a second too long thinking about it, then they manage to gain the upper hand, and you pretty much have to wait until they die.
Right.
And it's not a simple problem to solve, is it?
Oh no, like I say, under that exact scenario, like I said, however you like, no matter how you present it, with government being the final arbiter, the ultimate power, the ultimate authority, or this person that just had the bigger gun, or whatever, it still sets up the scenario where that person, the person that has ill intent or evil intentions, will still might be able to carry out and do. But like I say, the major difference, the one overarching difference between the scenario of government being that guy with the one gun in the room, or just a psychopath with the gun in the room, is the other 999 people have more of an incentive because they already acknowledge that this person is doing something outside what would be considered normal, like, using preemptive force.
This is what I'm saying. In reality, it takes time for that. It doesn't happen instantly. They don't all instantly rally and go, "Hey, wait a minute, this one guy is out of line." What happens is pretty much what happens now with government. People go along to get along, and it's only after some time that people
right. And I get it. Like I say, the scenario could work, but I'm saying the big key difference, and to me, that's the beautiful thing why I talk about intellectual enlightenment and evolution these days, is at least if the people have the concept and the full understanding that that person doesn't have, any legitimate authority to just go out and use force or steal from you, and that is at least, like I say, the scenario might unfold the exact same way as you suggest, but there's a much better chance, or a much less probable chance, of that happening if at least most of the people in the room don't have the belief that they're not supposed, right, to rail against the government or the person that's using the force or violence as their means to an end.
Well, I don't think
and what they do with it, I don't know.
I don't think it's as much. I mean, you talk in a way that leads me to believe that you're presenting society's faith in government as a blanket black and white faith, and that's not what I see.
Have you ever talked to anyone? Like, I'm talking most people. Like, there are exceptions, like people like us, but we're a very tiny minority.
Let's take a look at the red squares in Quebec, like the yellow vests in France. Remember?
Okay, yeah.
Remember the red squares?
No, I know the yellow vest, but I didn't hear about the red squares. But
well, a few years ago, I'm trying to remember how many years ago. Probably about 5 or 6 years ago. There were a series of protests, mostly in Montreal, by students, objecting to tuition hikes.
Okay.
And there were a lot of street marches and a lot of noise. And the mayor and the provincial leadership decided that they were going to crush this uprising brutally and sent cops out on the street. And for a couple of weeks or months, all we saw were students getting pepper sprayed and 5 or 6 cops beating up on a scrawny kid, And what started happening is, and one of my personal favorite, police declaring marches illegal, which seems to me the usurpation of judicial authority. What do I know?
Yeah.
I wasn't aware that the police had the ability to declare something illegal on their own without the power of the courts or the legislature. But
yeah, really, yeah.
We learn something new every day.
Yeah.
But what started happening is that parents, grandmothers, started going out onto the streets with the kids because the populace was having none of this, and the government toppled because of it. Well, I think that's a fair enough statement. The liberal government that was in place at the time toppled because of And so, you know, and we had a couple of other instances in Canada of government. So if you remember what happened to the Conservative government under Mulroney, going from 200 seats to 2, that was an utter and absolute rout. So I think we live in a society that has some robust mechanisms, and I believe that people aren't quite as passive as as all that. I think that it is pretty possible, maybe not that hard, for a government in these these Western democracies to go too far and to get to get what's the word I'm looking, reprimanded by the populace. It's that for people who aren't familiar with what we're talking about, a number of years ago, I'm trying to remember how many years ago, there was a prime minister who was widely perceived as being too corrupt, and as a result, he went from something like a 2/3 majority. His party went from something like a 2/3 majority in the country down to holding 2 seats in the parliament.
Right.
I think that I don't think it's as bad as all that. I think that we live in these societies that have these mechanisms, and I think that people are actually medium. I won't say totally, but people are medium awake to abuse of power, and they certainly will take action and not tolerate if they feel like it's crossed a bound.
Okay, I get you, but so here's where I'm going to have to go with it. My response to that would be, now this is just anecdotal, but I've never heard anyone debunk or suggest otherwise. So until then, I'm going to say that this is the lived experience for most people that I've ever interacted. And I would suggest it probably is for you, is in Canada now, varying degrees, levels, all these things, and preferences in terms of the side of the political realm or the spectrum, any area in there, that there's all kinds of variances there. But the one overarching thing that you will find if you go and speak to practically every Canadian alive is their belief in government. Now, I think the biggest problem then where this all happened obviously originates from the education system. Because in the education system, even though you are getting academics, obviously they need you, just like a farmer has to make sure the horse or the ox knows what to do, right? So there has to be some kind of formal education in terms of, and you want them to be productive. And our education is based on the Prussian model from Egerton's Ryerson that, went to Europe and brought this stuff to North America, in particular Canada, in the 1840s. But once you've created an institution where you're taking children at those very, very early age, because like I say, and I'm kind of fortunate in the way that I was raised in a religious family. This has actually been very beneficial to me because I've actually had to break through 2 crazy paradigms: is the religious institutions, Sunday school and church, and then government. And to me, it's like 2 sides of the same. It's all the same. Now, in a community, like I have lots of friends that were raised very, very religious fundamentalists. And if you talk to them, like, even just try to say, yeah, the earth's not 6,000 years old. Trust me, really, you beat your head against the wall all day long. You're just not going to. Why? Because from a very early age, they've been indoctrinated into this belief. Just like in school, it's not that the government, it's not like every day you go to school, like they're like, okay, now you got to pledge allegiance to the government. Although when I was younger, there was still lots of that stuff, or God, whatever. But it's still this constant underpinning premise where government is everything. Government is the authority. So you're constantly, and when you have an entire population or generation of people, like I say, imagine, if you will, I love using the example of Santa Claus. It's a great example. If you lived in a really isolated community with, let's say 10,000 people, and every kid within that community, they didn't have television or radio. They just whatever was taught to them in their community was raised to believe that Santa Claus is real. You would actually still have adults, right, running around believing that there's some dude hanging out North Pole waiting until one time a year to pop down and deliver, millions of presents or billions of presents to people. Why? Because that's all they're subject to.
People believe money is real.
Yeah, well, to me, money, that's the thing. When people talk about money is real. But what money is just a representation of the 3 key things of obviously is a medium of measuring of your value, a medium of exchange, and a means of retaining it. But it's just value. That's what money is. It's a representation of value. Now we place value on our intellect, on our labor. So
Santa Claus is a reputation of values.
Well, no, but Santa Claus but I'm talking about the guy in the red thing that delivers the suit. Money, we can actually use money, right?
Santa Claus is a representation of values.
Sorry, go ahead. There's what?
Santa Claus, Santa Claus is a representation of certain values.
Well, no, I'm not talking about but when I say like the guy, I'm talking about what people perceive as Santa Claus. The guy with the red and white hat and the big belly and comes and delivers presents.
That is a representation of certain values, is it not? So there's certain.
No, but you're talking about if you want to get into the story and the narratives of what, but I'm talking about just the belief in Santa Claus. Like when you were a kid, if you were raised to believe in Santa Claus, like because where I am in the
people are raised to believe that the value is in the piece of paper, but it's not.
Right.
Money is every bit as fictional as Santa Claus.
Oh yeah. Money is just the representation of that value, and it's a medium that we use to exchange and retain that value. Yes, of course, yes. But Santa Claus,
we believe in lots of things that aren't real.
Right. Well, even if you use whatever example you want to use, like I say, if you're raised, this is the point of why I want to have these conversations to talk about this stuff. It's not that I think like, because people will automatically accuse me, oh, you just want government to cease to exist tomorrow. But no, what it is if I want you to be a mature, articulate adult that's not still acting intellectually or psychologically as an infant, because that's what most humans that are even adult today that don't understand these concepts are doing it mostly out of a place of ignorance, but obviously a lack of intellectual curiosity. And I believe what that happens is because they don't feel that they have to, because they feel they've already been given the formulation. And how that happens is through a government-run education system. If you've ever been around people, which I have, who've been homeschooled and not had formal indoctrination through a public ed, they fully grasp and understand the concepts. Why? Because their minds have not been subject or closed in or boxed off to saying that government is your authority. You know, the books that says that goes through your education, these are the books that you must read. Like how many teachers, right? I mean, think about it. If we truly cared about human freedom, well, why aren't we taught the minute you went to school? Why are you never taught that if the government takes money from you against your will, that's theft? Like obviously, is it that every adult teacher just lacks the concept to know that? Like, no, it's because they recognize, well, first of all, especially teachers, they get their paycheck from the government. So it's a pretty
consensus of values. I mean, the reality is that most people, even most critical thinkers, do not perceive taxes as theft. They, at the very most, could.
And they're not thinking very critically, right? No, if someone I'll just use me, for example. I have never, ever in my life, ever given any government, any politician, no matter who voted them in, no matter which side of the political party or whatever initiative, endeavor, or tax they decide, I've never agreed to any of that. So by sheer fact that they're doing it against my will without me ever.
I guess I have a different perspective on that because I'm half American, and people used to ask me, why do you live in Quebec where the taxes are so outrageous? You could live anywhere you want in North America, which is true. And I have consistently chosen to live in some places with very high taxation, right, for a variety of reasons, not least of which I enjoyed having the Medicare safety net, which I would not have gotten if I lived, let's say, in Nevada.
Right.
I also, although I felt there was a great deal of corruption and graft, I felt that the overall societal benefits were worth it on the net. And so in my particular case, as a pretty libertarian person, I actually did, I do not feel like I was coerced. I chose. I clearly chose.
Right. Yes. And you did. But this is the problem with, this forced collectivization is you chose, but I didn't. Right. So like I say, and if I don't have the option to opt out, right, that's. Let
me ask you, you cannot tell me you feel you have no choice. You must intellectually recognize that you have some choice.
Well, like you said, my option would be I guess, for me to allow the government to say that they claim ownership over my land, that I should be able to leave my entire family and travel to different plantations or farms, right? I'm not sorry, I'm just not willing to just roll over and play dead for anybody, right? That's why I do what I do. Maybe if enough people like myself do this for enough time, and trust me, like we've got the universality, we've got the ethics, we've got the principles. It's just a matter of getting the information out enough. Actually, even the founding fathers realized that you need you need at least a somewhat well-educated citizenry or society for people to even understand these concepts. So what I recognize today is the biggest failure is not the fact that I lack any consistency in terms of what I put forth. It's the fact that most people, like I say, just like if I was a mathematician, well, I would have to recognize that in Canada, most people don't understand math. Now, is that my fault? Should I travel to someone somewhere else that understands math better? Well, I guess you could do that, but I guess my choice is, well, how about I just take advantage of the fact that I live in the age of information and start teaching people math. And in terms of this, it's not math, but in terms of proper ethics, morality, and universally consistent laws and how we, because like I say, that I believe that's where humans are either we're going to destroy ourselves entirely or we're going to reach this next phase of intellectual evolution where we kind of start to understand, like the people that are alive today, perfect example, if you went back, 500 years and said that kings and queens, they have no authority, you'd be, a lot of people would say, oh yeah, well they actually do, right? The king is appointed by God, or we can advance past this stuff. How long it's going to take, I don't know. It'll probably be, well, it definitely will be probably long past once I've left this earth, but I just want to be someone that's contributing to the discourse and at least helping people to think about these issues critically enough so that they can find some ways peacefully, preferably, to get enough people in their communities to reject the mysticism of central planning, and then they can set up their own social economic experience. Because me, really, at the end of the day, is I just want people to be free from forced subjugation or forced collectivization. That's all I really want at the end of the day. What they do with it, I don't know. Like I say, I'm just laying out the foundation for the principles. How it plays out, I don't know. And it's not just me. Obviously, there's lots of people that are doing the same thing.
Fair enough. I would really like to have another discussion with you where we talk about what you mean by mysticism, because it's a word that you use a lot.
Yes.
A lot. And
well, it's a belief in like, I'm all for, like you say, like even money is an abstract, right? But mysticism is a belief in an impossibility, right? Like magic is a mysticism, a belief in the guy. I mean, well, I suppose it's possible if someday proves it, but right now it's still, I would consider it in the theoretics, but of this guy sitting in on top of the clouds up there in the sky, right? Like the mysticism is things that from based on our, through our sense data, right? And that's really all we have at the end of the day is basically most of our humans, how we have to deal with everything in the world is through our sense data for the most part, right? We can conjure up abstracts as much as we want. But for most people, the simplest thing is let's eliminate the things that are impossibilities. Like I say, so mysticism is like, well, the four question quest of the myth of authority. Like people believe that, taxation, like you were saying, a lot of people believe that taxation is just normal. It's just what it is to live in society, but it's an impossibility to suggest. And we're told, think about it. You could go through your entire education system and every Canadian alive, almost, other than people that have actually delved into learning these things. But you have to take that initiative on yourself, because unless you have someone close in your family that's going to try to lead you down that road, most people would think, well, yeah, government exists through democracy. We go and vote, right? That's what we do. We show up at the ballot box. We check off someone's name. And just like I used in my 4 questions is, if I don't have I have no authority to go to my neighbor and take any of his money. I no, and everyone in my community would say, of course you don't. You're a thief, right? But they somehow believe that if I just go check someone's name on a box, that somehow I get to delegate. That's mysticism, because if I don't have that authority, how the hell am I granting it to someone else? If I don't possess it, then I can't pass off to someone something that's an impossibility. It's like like just logically consistent to understand that that's an impossibility. But most people don't get to that level of analysis most of the time because they've never been taught this stuff.
Especially around taxation, I have to say there is a great degree of choice there. I know several people who've chosen not to participate in the income tax system.
Yeah.
If you go to someplace like Italy, there are more people that choose not to than there are people that choose to.
Yeah.
So it is clearly you face some potential repercussions.
But that's the thing. But how do they get away with that? You're absolutely right. See, this is the problem with government, even this pretense of taxation, right? But because there are these loopholes or places where you can find ways to avoid that. That's why, I mean, think about it. If we were actually paying for all these entitlements that the government claims to provide, which they don't, obviously, because they just take from people and redistribute in other ways, the debts and deficits wouldn't be constantly. So no, because everyone is trying to, not everyone, but because there are a substantial portion of each population in every country that is avoiding have to be economically enslaved, although the people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale are the ones that are forced the most because they have less options available to them, right? If you have money, there are ways to hide that money because you have ways to find different jurisdictions and stuff.
Oh,
but
well,
I'm saying
most of the people I know who don't participate, I know one or two who don't, who are in the upper end of the socioeconomic spectrum, but most of the ones I know are on the lower end. Countries have black markets, and that's why you.
Oh yeah. Yes, but what you're saying is, yeah, but if they get caught, yeah, but what you're saying is, yes, they're doing it by fact that they're flying under the radar. But because if they're functioning in the black market, if someone in government, like if their neighbor, let's say had some, I don't know, documentation or video evidence, and they decide to rat them out, right? Then they're in trouble. So listen, I'm not naive. I don't realize that people do things that are outside the purview of what the law allows. The
point is that it's optional. But is that choice comes into it because.
But you're still playing Russian roulette.
If you're willing, well, they have the courage of their convictions. They are willing to play Russian roulette.
Yes. Oh yeah, for sure. But once again, it's also like I'm all for, just like we were getting back to the personal responsibility thing. I'm all for taking the onus and the responsibility on yourself to make sure you're protecting yourself as much as you can from these things. But the fact that I have to do it is by natural extension of the fact that the rest of the people in my community or in my country believe that I have to do things that are considered black market or illegal. Like marijuana and legalization in this country was the perfect example. I was never so happy to start talking about that in terms of the legalization, because it's the first time. I wasn't alive during Prohibition, but I'm alive during the legalization. And I told people before it even started, listen, all that means is the government now wants to take over that particular industry, because if you look at the laws, the rules on the books, and the rules and regulations prior to legalization, it was actually less people that were harmed or had economic sanctions or were jailed or in prison. But then what's happening now, actually, and there was your workplace, like testing in terms of workplaces were not nearly as prominent, except for in the trucking field. That was something that happened even prior to legalization. But legalization was just to capture. Now people are still, and they're even recognized why a lot of these corporate cannabis or cannabis corporations are going bankrupt and seeing their stocks just drop off, is because, yes, a lot of people still will function in the black market. But just like Jody and Mark Emery will tell you, the Prince of Pot and his wife there, is, yes, you can practice civil disobedience and acknowledge that they don't have any legitimate right to tell you if you can grow or sell a plant or not. You're not causing any harm to it. But, well, when they close down your shop, cause you to lose, hundreds of thousands of dollars of business, and, they can cause real harm to you. And the only reason why that takes place is because people believe that this thing they call government has some kind of authority to do so. Otherwise, nobody would believe that anyone has the right to shut down someone's shop that's doing something that there is no harm. To me, that was the other thing that kind of drives me nuts, is how many generations. It only took a few generations for us to get to the point where now it used to be understood historically that for something to be considered a crime, there had to be a victim, right? That would have been even hundreds of years ago. So it's like in some areas we've gone backwards.
I don't disagree with you on much of this, but I would just keep saying that the one thing that I do think I disagree with you about is the question that we're forced to, because there is a choice, and some people do make that choice. And so there are certainly repercussions to every choice one makes. And really, short of, really, even with a gun to my head, there's always a choice.
Oh, yeah.
Let someone shoot me rather than comply.
Yeah.
And so,
I would just never lay any claim that person that was holding the gun to your head had any legitimate authority. That would be the major discrepancy there. There's someone holding a gun to your head and you haven't done anything to them. You're a peaceful person. And if they're holding a gun to you, at the very least, I would expect me and the rest of the people that would know about this would at least point out the very real fact that this was someone that was doing something immoral. That's not how people talk about government these days, unfortunately.
I would agree that authority is, I'll tell you what, that would also be an interesting discussion. It'd be an interesting discussion to have, forget about the word government. It would be an interesting discussion to have about the word authority and leave it there.
Right.
love to talk about that. I'd love to talk about what authority might be, what might be close to universally accepted as an idea of authority.
Right.
So yeah, I think I'm probably getting towards the end of this conversation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm like, and if you want to, are you fairly astute in terms of economics? Because I love to discuss economics as well, like the macro and the micro aspects of it.
Sure. I mean, I don't consider myself that well educated on anything. No matter what we talk about besides computers, I'm going to say I'm not an expert on this, but
Yeah.
I don't mind having an opinion, and I certainly think that I feel comfortable in just evaluating things on the face of them, and so
Right.
yeah, talk about that.
Well, yeah. Well, actually, when you use the term educated, that's something that's kind of loosely used these days, because actually there's a lot of people, I consider myself to be educated, just not formally. Because like I say, I went through school, high school stuff. I didn't go into college or university. I was more or less the blue collar guy, get into that kind of work instead. But to me, that's kind of another thing, is I don't have any accreditation through any formal institution. But like I say, I've been educated informally by some of the greatest minds throughout history, because I have access to them. So yeah, sure, I could have been sitting in a classroom with 28 of my other peers by some middle of the road teacher that barely knows enough just to repeat or regurgitate some of the talking points that she's been told. So she's not even doing much critical thinking herself. It's just, let me just reiterate what I've been told, rather than, right? So to me, actually, I would, don't sell yourself short. I would suggest, if you're a
when I say I'm not that educated, what I mean is the number of things that I would like to know and don't know, and I know I don't know them, is a lot more than the number of things I do know.
Oh yeah. Well, actually, you know what? That's perfect. Then we can tie this up now by me reading that in a different ways. Yeah. The more I know, how's that go? The more I know, the more I know, the less I know. That's the beautiful thing about being intellectually inquisitive, though, is I love to learn these things. And as long as I talk to people like yourself, and I'm glad that this has turned out this way today, because I can tell pretty quickly in a conversation whether someone's just intellectually curious and just wants to have a genuine discussion, so that we can bounce ideas off each other. And that I'm all for. And like I said, I don't care where you come at. I don't care how you identify. It doesn't matter to me. It's the ideas that matter at the end of the day. You are someone that fits that description. That's what I want. I don't want to get in that. I've had this in the past where it just seems to be doubling down on kind of their ideological perspective and not having any ability to open up your mind to think about anything. I'm willing to listen to, like I say, whatever you have to say. And when I'm wrong, that's another thing I'll do. Whether I do it right now or if I give myself enough time to think about it, if I'm wrong, I will always own up and say, that's something I should have thought about more in depthly. And actually, I don't do that for you. Like, I don't do it for you, and I don't do it for anyone else. I do it for me, right? That's that beautiful thing. When people think they talk about selfishness, actually, I'm really selfish in that way, but it's good because I want to hold myself to a higher ideal. If I'm doing something or saying something that's incorrect, doesn't make any sense, right, then I want someone to correct me. Now, I get it. That cognitive dissonance, it's hard at first, well, especially when you start down any intellectual journey, because like I said, I've had my paradigm of Christianity busted up. I've had the whole statism. It's like, I've got no tribe, right? I'm just floating around here, right? But I'm okay. I'm okay with that, as long as I'm dealing with other people that are on at least a similar journey, because at least I know, I'm not worried about you seeking to use government to impose your will on me, right? So at the end of the day, that's all that matters, is that we're trying to venture down these roads and get to the understanding is, what are we going to do for humanity going forward? Because I have enough faith in humanity that I think we will figure out some way to get by this. And I think, to me, is the only possible way that can happen is, let's get out as much truth and information, or what you want to perceive as truth. Let's get as much information out there to people that they can start to truly delve down into some of these preconceived notions or concepts, because that's the only way it's going to work. We can't just keep the same cycle. We can't just we got to figure something out. Like I say, bring humanity into a mature level where we're actually into the adult world in terms of our thinking.
Humans are creatures that would like to move from one place to another. So I agree.
Yeah, we do. Yes.
I do look forward to talking some more about authority, because you left me with some questions that I'd like to talk about.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Adam, for coming having this chat with me today. And like I say, now that we have email, we can always contact each other back and forth now. And like, if you want to set it up for any time, just reach out to me. I don't get too overly busy. I haven't actually been doing streams a whole lot lately, so I'm totally open and available. So yeah, I look forward to our next opportunity.
So we'll talk again probably in a few weeks. And I thank you for inviting me. Very nice.
Always a pleasure. And I'm glad to see you're on ThinkSpot. And actually, ThinkSpot's turned out to be a pretty good place on there, because it does seem that there are people that are intellectually curious. And that was, to me, the big thing is now I don't have to wade through the crap. Like, well, Twitter, I mean, how do you communicate on Twitter, right? And 200 and something, just like, no, thanks, that's not for me, right? And Facebook, well, that's the thing. That's why I wanted to do this in an actual audio video discussion too, because you can get the nuances and deal with people, and you can see their emotions and stuff. Whereas, man, it's so easy to get things misconstrued in text form, right? So it's like, I love to have these kind of discussions, and yeah, we'll do it again soon. So you have yourself a great day, and thanks to the people that did join the stream. Sorry I didn't get the notice out there. And like I say, once I get this video up, if you want, do you have your own channel, Adam?
No.
Okay, I was going to say, if you wanted, well, you can feel free to use it and share it to your own channel, or you can re-upload it to your own if you want.
I definitely will. I'll love to show it to people. And thanks again for your time, and we'll talk again soon.
My pleasure. Have a good one, Adam. Bye. Okay, just going to